Welcome. I'm so excited to be here. This is actually my first time moderating here at the National Book Festival, and it is honestly a dream come true. A dream I didn't know I had until I knew the option was there. I was. No, here's why. I am one of those voracious book readers, always have been. I majored in English because I love to read so much, and part of the reason I love to read so much is because it takes you out of your current state and your world, and allows you to live maybe vicariously through characters and to travel places you've never been. And I will tell you that this experience is my first in reading a YA novel, and I'm like, where have I been? I love it, and I want to get a feel for it from the audience. Have you read either book? Yes? Raise your hand so we can. Perfect. They're amazing, and they have so many common themes, and we're going to get into all that. And I want to start asking you both, where did the idea for each of your books, specifically these, come from? And Ransom, we'll start with you.
Sure. First of all, this is my first time here too. So thanks for having me, and thanks for coming out this morning, early on a Saturday morning. And I'm very excited to be here with you guys. So this came from a combination of like unkillable nostalgia for the things I loved as a young teenager, and old 90s shows and movies and geeky stuff, and probably also geeky love of Los Angeles as a weird, broken, beautiful place that's just sort of riven through with secrets. And I wanted to combine the two things.
Okay. And Caroline?
I also have never been here before. I've never been to Washington, D.C. before. Can I just thank everyone? Please, thank you for inviting me. I know it's a very strange time in the city's history, long history, but I've had the most thrilling couple of days. So thank you, the district. But to answer your question, this is a time travel novel, but the way I've been kind of describing it, it's time, travel. Mm-hmm. So it's like about time as a concept and about travel as a concept. And really the first sort of germs of this idea came to me because I was a journalist and now I'm a novelist and I do a podcast and that tours. And so I'm somebody who travels an enormous amount for work. And it's a strange thing. I accept almost every invitation to travel abroad that I ever get. And I've always been that way. And it's often lonely and strange, and jet lag kills you, and sometimes you're wandering around a deserted city at a strange time of day, and it's always the siesta, and you can't get like as much as a Fanta lemon to save your life. Yes. And every time I'm like, why do I do this? And it's like, it's giving me something and I don't know what it is. And then I remember a few years ago, 2019, I was sent as a travel journalist with Lonely Planet, incredible assignment, to go for 2 weeks to Tahiti, which is like, I didn't travel at all growing up. You know, I grew up in a place where the airport had like 2 flights a day, you know, and it was amazing. I got sent to Tahiti, but I was there with a bunch of journalists from different walks of life, some of them right-wing journalists, some of them left-wing journalists, some of them bloggers. And we were, picked up from our hotel every morning at 6 a.m. and taken out to do these incredible things like whale watching or visiting volcanoes or whatever. And I was doing these insane things, but with people who I didn't know, and in many cases did not even like. and so it was a thing of like, I'm watching a mama whale talk to her baby, communicating with waves at 5 a.m. at the other side of the equator, and I'm listening to a Daily Mail journalist talk about like why women shouldn't have jobs. And I'm like, this is so bizarre. And so I wanted to write a novel. So the travel aspect came before the time aspect, because I wanted to write a novel that was about these traveling salesmen. So the kind of fantasy construct of this book is it's about a traveling salesman who travel in between parallel worlds, taking one thing from one area and selling it in another. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of my way of expressing how I felt about my life and my career in that moment of like, why can't I stop moving? And why am I so compelled by these people around me, even though I don't even like them, you know?
It's true, but what I find to be really quite talented to be able to do, it's one thing to write a book about Earth or a city and you've experienced it, you can research it, but then to create this parallel universe that is completely from your imagination. So when it comes to your fantasy world in Sunderworld, how, like where, what in your life experience gave you this visual of what it was going to be like? And where did you get that from?
So in my book, Sunder is this fantasy world that's sort of hidden secretly under the skin of Los Angeles that the main character, Leopold, grew up watching as a really crappy, like low-budget 1990s TV show, and then realizes is real when he's sort of invited into it. There's more to it than that, but he's invited into it and he discovers this place that's actually real and creaky and messed up and not what he expected. And he expects to be greeted as this sort of chosen one who's there to save this world.
Yes.
And he's very swiftly humbled and forced to reckon with failure and disappointment and then figure out what to do with that and how to continue. But the world itself, much of it is just Los Angeles, which is inherently strange and fantastical and is like a place constructed out of fantasy. You know, all of the dreamers and weirdos and cultists across the country sort of congregated in Southern California in like 1920 and have just been building castles in the air ever since. And many of them have crumbled half into dust and they're still there. And it's just a fascinating place to explore. Like one of my inspirations for the way into the book and the world was this old restaurant in downtown LA called Clifton's Cafeteria, which existed until 10 years ago, and now it's not really, it sort of closed, but it was this 3-story tall, massive walk-in diorama of a redwood forest scene with little animatronic gophers and things that would pop out of fake chlorinated streams. And it was an inspiration for Walt Disney to create Disneyland. But when I discovered it 15 years ago, it was broken and the wires were fraying and it was about to burn down and everything smelled like old Jell-O. And I was like, there has to be a portal somewhere in the basement or something. So a lot of it was just the skin of LA itself and its weirdness. And anything beyond that, I feel like when I'm creating a fantasy, I'm really just mining reality and translating it into something that feels like fantasy. But it's an opportunity for me to talk about the texture and strangeness and, you know, conflicts of my own life, but through this other lens.
And Caroline, yours involves trains, time travel, very different sets of people. And where does that come into play? Like how did you create that up here? Because I know we were talking backstage and you said this was your first like YA novel.
No, it's not my first YA novel. It's my 7th novel overall, and it's the first sort of portal fantasy I've ever done. So I wrote a trilogy called the Gifts Trilogy, which was basically set in a version of my hometown of Cork, but it was kind of like the Buffy version of Cork. You know, it's sort of magic is real, but we all get the bus. Do you know what I mean? Which is kind of urban fantasy. Whereas this was the first time where I really felt up to the task as a writer of creating not just one world, but like several worlds from scratch, because I knew I wanted this to be not just like a portal fantasy, but like, as I said, about these salesmen traveling between these different worlds. And obviously then that begets the challenge of like, well, what are these worlds then and what makes them exciting? And a free tip to any aspiring novelists in the audience, I'm a big graph person. I'm a big visual learner. I start every book with a diagram. And when I was starting out, that used to be just the big hero's journey circle, and I would just plot I love how we've got library members here. Like, we know what the hero's journey is. We know. But then as I kind of matured through the profession, that started to change. And what Skipshock began with was 2 lines. It was an XY axis, and I wanted the X to represent temperature, so it gets very, very warm over here, very, very cold over here, and the y-axis would represent time. So the further north you go up this axis, the faster time gets. So we're talking about worlds where it's 10 hours in a day, 8 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours. And so time is moving extremely quickly. That means that days are moving very quickly, people are aging and dying far faster, but simultaneously, resources like oil and coal are developing really quickly as well. So even though these places are filled with kind of people who are impoverished and have to move very quickly in order to live their lives, they also are sitting on a gold mine, which really like reflects the world that we live in, right? Like some of the most impoverished countries in the world have some of the richest resources, and the people who live there can't access them. And so then in the sort of the southern, the further south you go down this y-axis, the slower worlds get, and that is where all the kind of power sort of coincides when you have these worlds that have like 60-hour days, and people sit on wealth for generations, and they just have a totally different consensus of what people in the north, to them, it's almost like, well, they only live as long as cats, so why would we bother think about them at all? And I really wanted to do that because it's almost like a way of talking about privilege, which is a conversation that I think has very kind of broken down over the last decade, because we started in good faith of being like, let's all check our privilege at the airport, and let's all tell everyone what we're coming in with and who our parents are and what our, religion or races. But then it became this sort of embattled thing that ended up dividing people about like, well, my parents were working class. Well, my parents were immigrants. And it became this thing where it became about people excusing themselves from taking responsibility as opposed to acknowledging their responsibility and then contributing to the world. And so I wanted to write a book where every single person who reads it is in the exact same position of privilege, which is they have 24 hours in the day, and everyone they're reading about in these northern worlds is far less privileged than they are,
Yeah.
And so all the worlds were plotted based on that metric. And so let's say if a world is very hot and very quick, it's kind of sort of like a desert-y type of world. There's a lot of like strange drugs that develop there because of the minerals in the soil. And I kind of, if it's a desert-y type of world, it means the bathing culture is very important. So there's a whole world where it's mostly just them going to bathhouses, which was really fun.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, I basically took where these worlds were on this access point, and then I sort of kept developing it from there.
Both characters, both Leopold and Margot, are coping with grief, the loss of a parent specifically. How did you approach sort of writing that grief so that it's real and imaginative? I could sit here and assume it's from potentially losing a parent, but that's not necessarily true. Ransom?
Well, I did grow up without my dad. He passed away when I was just young, 1 or 2. And so wrangling with, life with one parent or no parents is a really normal thing to do in YA fiction, because you want to take that away from your safe environment, away from your characters, to put them into situations of pressure however you can, and that's a good way to do it. But it's also something that I've just always grappled with, like, how do I reckon with that vacuum, and how do you fill it, and who are you in the absence of that, what might have been this defining personality, and how do the ghosts of them that you discover along the way through other people or stories or something, is the person you're forming in your mind real, or some ideal that's like, unreachable, actually. So Leopold loses his mother suddenly when he's 11, and soon thereafter starts hallucinating the world of Sunder into the Los Angeles that's around him. And later comes to realize that it's not real and it's not there, and they were hallucinations and trauma responses and stuff. And his father, meanwhile, his parents were divorced. He goes to live with his father, and his father's this very cold, remote, rigid, self-styled, best-selling author, success coach, sort of like a
irony, yeah.
Poor man's Tony Robbins, but he thinks he's totally amazing. And Leopold has, a million complexes and inferiority issues and, insecurities, and his father sort of crushes him, and Leopold allows himself to be crushed, and he retreats into this interior world, and he retreats into fantasy, and he gives himself over entirely to this world and this show and this fantasy, and finally reaches a point where, you know, it's all tied through with grief.
Sure.
It's all sort of a metaphor for that. He finds the tapes of the show, the VHS tapes of the show, among his mother's things in a cardboard box that was destined for the garbage. And so he feels like he sort of rescues it from, you know, his mother's life, although he doesn't know how she was involved. And he drives this old beat-up piece of junk Volvo station wagon, which belonged to her, and is a metaphor for loss. And he hasn't touched the odometer since she died, and now it's like 7,621 miles. And sometimes he'll ride his bike just so that the odometer doesn't creep up anymore. And so, you know, I approach grief that way myself, sort of obliquely. Don't just sit there and cry exactly. You just sort of build your life like an inflammation around the absences, and he does that too.
And Caroline, I'm going to get to you in a second, but staying with Leopold and his father and that dynamic and that relationship, it's the parent who is still alive, who has to raise this child as a parent. It's like you're doing the best you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be abrasive. It can be perceived that way from the child. But I always feel like we all in life, when we get to a certain point, look at the surviving parent from a place of compassion and understanding and empathy and going, maybe this person does love me and care about me more than I was giving them credit for. And there is a point in the novel where he glimpses that dad that he was like, oh wait, does he really care what happens to me? Because he sure doesn't act like it other times. And was that from your relationship with a surviving parent, that there was a moment where you looked at them and went, you know what, you really had a lot on your plate after my dad died, and you probably were doing the best you can, and any of those times that I thought otherwise, sorry.
I'm sure that's in there. I'm still sorting it out. But I think like the sort of work you do on yourself is to complexify people who may seem, their energy toward you may seem very simple and one-dimensional, but if you can imagine them more complexly than that, then that actually is helping you.
Yeah.
And both Leopold and his father go on these growth journeys through
That's true.
through the book, and will through the series.
Yeah.
It seems to be a story about him and his mom in the fantasy world that he goes into and that discovers is real sort of as a result of his mom, but it's really about his relationship with his father.
Yeah.
His father, who's like this sort of sledgehammer and who he thinks of as a total antagonist,
Enemy, yeah.
who's just ruining his life and traumatizing him. He's much more than that, and it sort of slowly comes as Leopold reckons with his own flaws and his own shortcomings and grows up. He realizes his dad is a lot more than that.
Yeah. And Caroline, Margot also, there's a connection there. There's a death of a parent and grief. Where does that come from you personally?
Do you know, there's actually a stronger connection with Margot to Ransom's work than you might think, because I mean, as you said, YA fiction often begins with the death of a parent, and I think, I mean, I luckily have two surviving parents, so I didn't really have a huge experience of childhood grief, but I do think that we as authors often use that because I think young adult fiction is interested primarily in this precipice moment where you are forced to confront a world that is not fair. And the most unfair thing that can happen to you is that you can lose a parent or a sibling. And so it would be the first time that we meet Margot, she is in a therapist's office, or she's kind of remembering a therapist's sort of the one grief counseling session she got after her father dies.
Yes.
And the therapist ends up giving her a small piece of advice that ends up impacting the plot in ways that she cannot imagine. And that was my little hat tip to Miss Peregrine's Home for the Peculiar, because you've got this sort of very small little therapist role that actually turns out to be very important. Because I mean, this is great, sir. This. I'm sorry, I'm Irish. This is like a huge thing for me because like it really is one of my favorite YA novels of all time, and like it's crazy to be here with you, Ransom.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
But yeah, I really wanted to have that I reference a lot of my favorite YA novels throughout my work, and that's one of them. Specifically, what I wanted to do with Margot's relationship to her father, who has passed, is deal with this, something I've experienced in later life grief, because I've had friends who've died. And when somebody who's in their 20s dies, this sort of fog descends of, oh God, he was such an amazing guy, and he was so talented, and he was this. And I'm thinking specifically of a friend of mine who died in my 20s, and I remember thinking, really? Because he hated you. He thought you were a real piece of, we used to talk about you all the time.
Yeah.
He thought you were untalented. And the fog of grief, where like complicated people get flattened into this one sphere of like, gone too soon, loved him so much. And Margot, she is dealing with the fog of grief that descends of like, your poor father, that poor accident. And then it's only not till much later in the book where she realizes, my dad was a complicated guy, and also I don't think I was raised right by him. So that's what I wanted to do with grief in that.
And both the characters are reluctant heroes. What do you think makes that type of protagonist so compelling to readers, Ransom?
That's a great question. We can ask Joseph Campbell. That's an essential part of the hero's journey.
I mean, yeah, are there any, it's so strange, 'cause I know you've done sort of screenwriting as well, and in screenwriting you constantly we have to have active characters, they have to be making decisions.
Right.
It's such a thing that they drill into you so much, and it makes sense when you're watching a visual medium, because you want so that main character is driving the narrative all the time. You're following them all the time. But in real life, if either of you were telling me an anecdote about your day, and you were like, and then I made some active choices, and then, like, no, the best anecdotes are like, I was in this restaurant and this guy came in and he was going off and I just sat there. That's like every anecdote. And so you have to constantly sort of like juggle those two things. What is real human behavior, which is what we're seeking to map in the novel, versus what is good story. And I think you have to inevitably have the reluctant hero, right? The person who refuses the quest and who is not suited for the job so they can grow into it.
Yes, exactly. That was very, very well said. I think that as readers, it's characters are expressed and unfold, before us as a result of the choices they make. And that's the activity. If they're just always like, yes, I'll run toward the danger with no forethought whatsoever, and like actively choosing to confront all the problems, and they're a hero from the beginning. Well, there's no movement, they don't become anything. But also you don't get to see that matrix of choices and difficulties and inner conflict that, lead to, I don't know, I don't think so, to, John Wick doesn't want to kill all those people.
Right.
He'd rather not, but they finally, come for his dog, and he just has to. And that's more compelling than he was just sitting there waiting to kill some bad people.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we get this a lot in kind of critiques of, I foray into sort of readers' sort of platforms every now and then for my sins. And you do get a lot of readers who are very frustrated with the idea of a chosen one. Which is interesting, because there's always that fun moment when you're writing or reading where you're like, and the thing is that the granddad all along, wow, he was connected to this whole, this paragraph again. But also you need that character to not just happenstance into like a great family tradition or an amazing gift. They have to sort of earn it as well. So it's like trading off that satisfaction.
You both also write about outsiders, right? What draws you to writing about people who don't quite fit in?
I think that all of us, no matter our background or history, can relate to feeling like an outsider at some point in our lives. Like, we don't belong here, we don't fit, maybe we're an imposter, So that's just like a universal human thing. And for me, I always felt a little, I can't really explain why, like objectively looking at my life growing up in southern Florida as a kid, I wasn't that different from everyone else around me. We all looked and acted pretty much the same, but in my head, I felt like such a weirdo. And, it would be the summer, and everyone would be out doing their things, and I'd be in my room in bed with my headphones on, listening to grunge metal tapes and reading Stephen King novels, and brooding. And I always felt like the outsider coming in, and I'm not sure where that came from. There's something to unpack there probably. But,
Yeah.
my characters have always been looking for that found family,
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't have a family. I need one. Where do I get it? I'm outside looking in.
Right. You're finding your people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about that though, because I was very similar to you, reading Stephen King and listening to the Pixies in my bedroom and feeling like I was the only person in the world who was doing that, when obviously
Well, now we're all here.
everyone in this room does that and does it still. But I wonder often that, because you and I sort of grew up in a pre-phones era, is the feeling like you're the only person in the world who's like this. Maybe you have it less now when you have like so many online communities where you can share and realize things and find community quicker.
Yeah.
But does that also take away from the inherent main character syndrome of being like, and only I know about the Pixies?
I think this is a fascinating discussion because there's tribes out there for everyone.
There is.
Yeah.
You find them immediately. It's a hashtag. It's a movement.
But does that suck in a way?
But is it real?
Yeah, is it real? It doesn't
Like,
suck?
Yeah.
You become part of it, but do you really feel connected with it, or is it sort of paper thin, and the minute you put your phone away, you're alone again?
Yeah. I think there's also different stages in life, too, if we were to look at ourselves. When we're in school, there's a built-in community, right? You have classmates, and then you either connect with them or you don't, and you feel like an outsider. And then you graduate to college, and it's almost starting all over again. And it's like, okay, who are my people here? Then you find your people there, and then you graduate, and then you go scatter all over the place. Again, you go through like, God, I feel alone again. Who's in this exact moment of life as I am right now? Who are these people like-minded? It happens again and again and again, and it never really stops. And even when you become a mother, you're so isolated again. I know my kid's not the only one that doesn't sleep through the night, but you still feel as if it's only happening to you and nobody else can connect and truly understand. And when you find your people, it's not always guaranteed that they're always going to be there through all phases of life. And so, at least reading this, I always connect most to characters in any book that just don't quite fit.
It's such a good point, though, because like you were saying that this was your first experience reading YA as an adult, but I do think there's a reason that you get a lot of adult YA readers, because there is an enormous amount of loneliness baked into adult life that is really explored in YA fiction. Like for me, I never read young adult fiction when I was a young adult. I was reading it in my 20s when I was trying to be a journalist, and I felt like the only person who had it worse than me was Katniss Everdeen.
Well, she did have it pretty bad.
She did have it bad.
Yeah, she did. And I think that's, and to me, when I read this at this age, at this point, and connecting with the characters, I connect with teenagers. Okay, I know how that feels. Not because I was a teenager, but I currently feel that as well.
Yeah.
I also feel for the adults in there, right? The parent who's still around, who's doing their best to raise their child. I was telling you before, I said, there better be some sort of a sequel where maybe a mom knows that she's not really dead, because I feel for the mom who thinks her daughter is gone after she lost her husband. Now she lost her daughter. So I feel all the things for all the people from the perspective of somebody who's lived a little more life than maybe a 15, 16, 25-year-old. And that's why I found it to be so very appealing and like, oh my gosh, there's more. And speaking of more, I'll ask you first, Ransom, when you're writing a series like this, how far are you in the process? This is volume 1.
Yeah.
Even if it just lives here, how far out does it go?
It goes pretty far, but the further it goes, the more speculative it becomes. I usually have an end in mind.
You do, like a very end in mind. Like the end game is up here.
Usually, yeah. There's usually like, the end of the chess match is there, and the beginning of the chess match is there, and there's a couple points along the way that are like negotiable. And as I go, it sort of shifts around, because the ideas that I have when I'm actually in a scene and the characters are, living and talking, like the ideas that come out when you're at the keyboard are always better and feel more real and motivated by character. Whereas when I'm looking at it from like a top line perspective, you know, we get this question like, are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
Yeah.
I think most people are a little bit of both. You know, I can't just plot everything out in God mode and have it be perfect, because at that point the characters are kind of stick figures and they haven't started to speak. And when they do, it changes things like inherently and dramatically. And if I just follow this rigid outline the whole time, then I start to force them into unnatural positions and it becomes wooden. And so it's difficult to plan the whole thing, because if I followed that, it would feel weird and bad.
Number 2, volume 2, timeline for it coming out to the world.
TBD.
TBD.
We will be announcing something relatively soon.
When have you begun it?
Yes, I finished it.
Okay,
Ish.
good.
It's like Frost Nixon.
No, because I'm asking
Yes.
because when you sit to begin, and this is for both of you, when you sit to begin the next volume or the next book of something, do you take breaks from it, work on other things and come back to it? Or is it one of those like, I'm sitting here and I'm just gonna, well, however long this takes, I've got to just focus on this one?
You mean in the middle of a draft of a book?
Yeah. When
Oh,
you're,
I can't do something else. No. It would,
This is, well, or just
Break.
even beginning the story of the second book, or actually at your computer writing your second book.
yeah. There's a big like crash for promotion and stuff when the first book actually comes out. You're very busy with other things.
Yes.
But for me, if I stay away from the keyboard and the characters for too long,
Yeah.
it gets hard to get back. You know, that muscle starts to become less elastic. So I got back to it pretty quickly.
Okay.
And I thought it was finished many months ago, and then I realized it needed to be bigger and more, so
Okay.
now it's finished again.
And then you're finished again. And Caroline, with you and the
I have an interesting sort of relationship with series in general, because when I wrote my sort of first trilogy, the Gifts trilogy, I sort of pitched that as a kind of a standalone, and you know, it was a very simple story. It was very focused around tarot cards. I was very deeply into tarot cards at that point in my life, and it was like, okay, it's a simple plot. Girl has friend goes missing. Use tarot cards to get friend back. It was like a very simple mystery, and I was like, this is such a commercial idea. And then I was sort of asked if, you know, I would like to
stretch
write a
it.
series, and I was like, oh, that's so kind of you to ask. I love money. But honestly,
Yes.
those were the novels that made me a full-time novelist, and that was huge. I was still in my 20s at the time, and I had that moment of being like, oh right, I haven't really thought past what happens after she gets the friend back, but I really sat with it. I was like, okay, well, now they got to deal with everything they said to each other and all that stuff. And then I had this kind of antagonist in this, who was a kind of a 21-year-old kind of evangelical sort of neo-Nazi, and he was the antagonist of that first book. And then I got to the second book, I was like, yeah, he's a neo-Nazi, but he's also 21. Like, do we say that he's doomed forever? Like, how do we get him? Is there a redemption arc? Can you write a redemption arc for someone like that? And then that became like the exciting challenge to me. And now he's like one of the most beloved characters I've written, because teens love an anti-hero.
Yes.
The more screwed up, the better.
Yeah.
And so that was the sort of like literally building the tracks in front of me as I was going, and it was the most sort of like creatively rewarding experience of my life. And then with this, I was like, it just kept, it was again supposed to be standalone, kept getting longer, and then eventually I said to my publisher, you know, it's 200,000 words and it's too short. You either need to give me another year, and I'll give you like a Priory of the Orange Tree, sort of like
Yes.
a thickie, or we can split it in two. And they decided that we would split it in two.
So 2 is where we're.
I think two
Ransoms could
of
go-
the story.
Gosh knows how many volumes. Yours is probably.
I think this story about these two characters
Yeah.
will be just 2 books, but I would love to sort of return to the world and have a sort of a cinematic universe, if we will, of the mind.
Which is more challenging to write? One that you know will be a series, or just a standalone one and done, Ransom?
I don't know. I've never written a standalone.
You've
To
never.
me, that sounds more challenging.
It does. What about it sounds more challenging to you, honestly?
Because you have to make all the decisions and wrap everything all up in one book, and it's got to be very efficient storytelling. Every plant has a payoff in that book. The gun on the first act, the gun on the wall in the first act has to go off in Act 3, and I think in some ways it would be cool to do, but it also sounds tough for me because I love planting seeds and being like, what if? And look in this dark corner, and then I'm like, I'll tell you what's in there in a few books.
Do you feel the same? Is it more daunting, you think, to do standalone?
Well, I've done standalone, so all my adult novels are standalone novels, and it's interesting because adults don't really expect a sequel, and they sort of expect from sort of adult contemporary fiction that you will just sort of leave the character there, and that is its own challenge. But the feeling of writing a final page, and it's the final page, and you're like, you feel like a musician in those moments. It's so strange, and like as a failed musician, it does when you get to that last page, and it feels like 3 verses, a chorus, and the repeat chorus. You're like, yeah, kind of thing. It's an amazing feeling, but it takes a lot of work to get there.
When you are writing, do you ever think? I mean, of course, it's a big dream. But do you ever write in hopes that it could become a movie or it could become a TV show? Or is that just a very happy, it's an accident? Ransom, do you ever think about that?
I try not to.
Well, he's got a movie, isn't it?
No, but is that with intention? Like when you sat down to write, were you thinking, God, this would be incredible. Like I'm going to do screenplay. Yes. Like this could totally, I love it. Or after the fact?
No, I think when I'm approaching a project, I'm usually like, no one's going to read this. This is going to, just like go quietly into that good night. I'm just writing this for me, and that's going to have to be enough. And so my audience, my imagined audience, is really small when it's fresh and new, and then only once it's actually, published do my hopes start to grow. But when it comes to TV and film, like it's complicated out there.
It is.
And sometimes you get what you wish for, and it can be like it's a journey.
I'm fascinated by what you just said about the audience, and it's a small audience in your mind. In the radio world, a little insight. Whenever we meet with consultants or whatever, and we're trying to come up with topics and things that we talk about, we have a person. This is who you were talking to, and always remember you're talking to this person. It's a woman. I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. This is not necessarily ours, but it's a woman. She's in her mid-40s. She definitely works. She has 2 children, and she cares about X, Y, and Z issues. And so when I get behind a microphone, that's always in the back of my head. It's like, is she understanding this? Is she going to connect with this? When you're writing your novel, and same question for you said you're writing for yourself, and that could be your answer, but what are some of the things you keep asking yourself with a small audience in mind, and who is that audience?
Well, at first the audience is always me. And because it's YA, it's like me as a 15-year-old. Like,
it's you
would me as a 15-year-old have thought this was cool? And then after I'm finished with a scene or a chapter or something, I'm like, will people turn the page, at the end of this chapter, or will they go, DNF,
Oh, very
DNF.
nice.
Oh, God.
To borrow the cutting language of Goodreads.
Yeah.
3 stars, DNF. Like, then just move along, lady. Like, don't leave a review.
Who are you thinking about?
I think it's a very easy answer, because that question is always answered in the dedication. Like, whenever I write a dedication to anyone, it is always like, this is the person I had in mind and who I wanted to read it, and whose opinion I care about.
Somebody in your personal life?
Yeah, often, frequently, or sometimes not. Like, my first novel, which was published in the UK and not here, was just dedicated to women who worked in offices. because I was like, that's why I want to read it. And then this one is dedicated to my friend Tash Hodgson, who was the first person I gave chapters to, and was the first person who was like, I think this is the coolest idea you've ever had. And I was every time I was writing a chapter, I was like, oh, Tash is gonna love this, you know.
Did Tasha get to read it every step of the way and help you?
Let me tell you more than that. So Tash happens to be a Broadway actress. And she not only is it for her, but she also reads the audiobook, which is coming out in a week's time.
That's awesome.
So it's like, it's going to be the audiobook event of the year. She's in Operation Mincemeat, if anyone's seen it. So I think it must be the first time in history that the person reading the audiobook is also the person who it's dedicated to.
Yeah.
So like even listening to it, she was like, to Natasha Hodgson. And I was like, that's you.
But how much input would you give her in your creative process? So you're thinking this, you said it's with her in mind. If she loves it, then that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Did she give you feedback to be like, why would Margot ever do that? Or why did Margot even say that? Did she give you any type of guidance in that way?
No, not really. I think because and this is also like questions we get a lot at events like these are, you know, advice that you'd give younger writers. And for that, I always say, like, really manifest a group of friends around you who are so involved in each other's creative work. Like I've given her feedback on her stuff, she's given me feedback on my stuff, but generally it is such a hype machine. And like, I remember her just texting me after I sent her a chapter and she went, Philip Pullman found rotting. I was like, that's what you want from your friends. Just a joke about the death of an already very old man.
Yes. When you get to meet readers, as you are today, what is the most interesting piece of feedback? Or one that stands out? It could be any kind of feedback. It could be interesting, it could be crazy, I don't care. Pick your adjective. But what's feedback that you think about as you create? Any?
You can't think about any of that, I don't think. And you can't, like, the second that you're in, like, I want one lonely kid to know just this sort of thing, you do find yourself getting into quite bad writing if you feel like you're pontificating through the work. But like some of the best stuff that people come up to you with is just so unexpected.
Like, I know I'm putting you on the spot. Can you think of something that was unexpected?
Yes, actually. So I had so in that original trilogy I wrote, there was a trans character who changed their name to Ro, and I have now met over the years several trans kids who have changed their name to Ro, that has been their chosen name, and it makes me cry it's happened like 3 or 4 times, but it makes me cry every time it happens because it's just like, it was sort of like a little torch for them, and it lit their way somewhere, and
those are moments where you go, this is why I do. Like, at the end of the day, this is why I do what I do, and this is connecting with people in ways you'll never get to know necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And sorry.
And Ransom, do you have any interaction with a fan or a reader?
Well, the praise I don't have, when people are kind enough to say nice things, I don't hold on to it. My body rejects it immediately. It never sticks. That's just the writer's paranoia of praise that's in me. And readers rarely will come up to you and be like, your work sucks.
They're not brave.
It does happen, but not very often. But the thing that I enjoy most and that I find most useful as a writer is when they talk about a specific character. And I related to this character for this reason, or I was someone who lost their grandparent, or this one little scene, and you don't often get that, so it's pretty rare. And sometimes I just want to, if someone's saying something, like your book affected me or whatever, I'm sort of like, why?
Well, tell me more.
Because
it's you're fishing for compliments, but actually you just want detail.
And when a book comes out, there's a lot of noise if you're lucky and stuff, but there's rarely do you get like scene level feedback on anything. Often, even from your own editor, it's just sort of like, I don't know, I feel like I just, sent it into the void, and what I got back was noise but no information.
Yeah.
You know, so like the next time I sit down to write, I'm like, well, I hope that worked because I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that. I always feel that way as well. And whenever I'm like lucky enough to have someone send me something nice that they've read about one of the books or whatever, there is a kind of your body does reject the praise. You're totally right. And it's also that thing of you very rarely get information on what someone enjoyed about a particular scene. And I do think if you guys are writing emails to authors, that is what pulls us in. That's what makes us respond.
You don't actually have to write an email. You can come up to the microphone and ask questions, because I think we have a few minutes now to take some questions. If anybody would like, there are 2 microphones right up here, and we'll alternate sides. I think we have about maybe 10 minutes or so.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so my question is about...
What's your name?
Oh, Isabel.
Hi, Isabel.
I'm Isabel. And Caroline, I love your podcast.
Oh, thanks.
Devoted
What
listener.
about the podcast?
What
Good
bit?
question.
Can you be more specific?
What part, Isabel?
Oh, it started something.
Kidding.
My question is about writing for young people. I'm curious about how you kind of strike the balance between just entertaining them and sort of books as a friend to them versus like trying to impart some wisdom or some lesson. You know, I feel like I know I'm getting older because I have that anxiety about the kids being all right. You know, like how much responsibility do you feel in those moments? Like I have this captive audience, I have to say something really important versus I just want them to have a good time reading my book.
I try to impart as little wisdom as possible. I will often, I get a little self-conscious about it, and sometimes I'll put a lot in there, and I'll, you know, there will be a lot of action and things are happening. Then I'm like, here's the part where the character goes interior and has a big, you know, realization about life, and then that's the part I usually cut in revision. It's there on the page, you know, like if something happens and there's a reaction and whatever, you know, it's there. Like the reader is really smart, and you feel things, you know, just by experiencing them on the page. So every time I start to explain too much and become the sage, I feel like it falls over. So
it's so interesting because like when I sort of stack up my kind of my young adult career and my adult contemporary career, I find that the young adult stuff is far more political. And it's less so in the realm of advice and here's something that's good about self-esteem and like knowing your body or whatever. But you do, of course, you want to like write propulsive plot. You know what kind of attention you're competing for with a young person, not just sort of screens or whatever, but like school and friends. Like teenagers have less time than anybody, it feels like, you know, and you know that you're competing and you do want something propulsive, but you do have this kind of kernel inside of you of like, what do I just need them to know? Like, if you put everything else just aside of like, you know, all the sort of pleasantries and things that we tell kids why it's important to read and brush your teeth or whatever. And what I sort of landed on for this book particularly was you are going to be asked to hate people who have less than you, and you will be taught that over the course of your life, and here is why you need to reject it at every possible turn. This is like this is very much an immigration book. I am an immigrant. I live in a country that I wasn't born in, and I am never treated like one because I speak English and I'm white. And I feel like a responsibility to speak for that community because I know tragically I will be heard because I'm a white blonde lady with an online following, you know, and I deliberately did this book that is about people moving from place to place, that is about worlds with the really harsh climates that are really hard to live in because we are at the precipice of the most enormous immigration crisis because of climate change, because of global instability, because of things that the West has sown. And like, that's all very lofty and very, I read the New York Times on my phone kind of thing. But what that will drill down to is that the current crop of kids are going to be encouraged to despise people who have less than them even more because they're going to ask to separate their feelings and their empathy from people who are struggling and in trouble. And like that was the only thing I felt truly sincere about. But I made sure it was all happening to very sexy characters. So that's the rub.
Margot and Moon are very sexy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan.
Hi, Susan.
Questions? Hi. The question is for Caroline. I'm a podcast listener. I was really tickled to see in your acknowledgments that you reference your friend Jen County and your train trips through Europe together.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, what specifically about those trips influenced this book?
Okay, thank you. So yeah,
I love your trips.
Thanks. Yeah. So because this is a sort of a hopping worlds by train novel, me and my friend Jen County, who I do my podcast with sometimes, we just sped all around Europe on a train last summer, and I could technically put it on my tax return because it was research, and we did record a podcast. It's hard to say, but I think all sorts of travel really has been fed into this book, and also having a travel companion really fed into this book. And like when you have somebody who you can like sit on a 14-hour train with, or like sit in a train station with at like 1 a.m. and just sort of asleep on your bags together, and you're in your 30s, you know, you're used to comfort at this point, was just one of the most lovely moments of my life. And I said this already, but like my friends are my muses. You know, I have no greater influence than them, and she's definitely one of them. I'm going to tell her that you said that.
I know she was waiting earlier. Sorry. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Sofia Martinez, and I know we're supposed to talk about what's your book's name again, Ransom Briggs?
The new one or the old one?
New one.
Sunderworld.
I know this is about Sunderworld, but the community in Tumblr, that's where most fans are active, asked me a few questions. One of them is, what's the name of Abe Portman's wife, if you ever made one for her?
I don't think I ever did. No. And no one has ever asked me that question before.
The specific questions that we were looking for.
That's
If I ever return to the world, she's getting a name.
You did a great job getting an answer that wasn't an answer from
Wow.
your community.
I could have made something up, but then
You
I would
could have,
lock
but I'm
myself
glad.
in.
You know what? That's true. Thank you so much. And we have one last question here before we have to wrap it up.
Hi, my name is Marina, and I'm also a huge fan of Caroline's podcast, which I think is common amongst the room.
Thank you for getting up so early, by the way.
Well, we listened to the podcast and we knew you were coming.
Yeah.
So my question is, you have a book called Promising Young Women, and how upset were you when a film with the exact same title came out a couple of years later? How did that feel for you? I want to know the lore.
You are stirring the pot this morning, young woman. I sold a lot more copies of the book because there's a lot of like reviews for that book that are like, I thought this was the novel of the movie, but it isn't. But it's good, and so that's nice. And then I remember getting a call after the Oscars that year from my agent saying, I've got a bunch of production companies who would love to meet you. I was like, well, that's fabulous. And they're like, yeah, they're really excited about your Oscar. And so there was a time where, and because Emerald Fennell, we don't look alike, but again, we're both sort of white blonde ladies with followings online. There was a while I was getting confused with her. That doesn't happen anymore because she's extremely famous. But I'm not working on the Wuthering Heights adaptation. Do you know what? It was a tough kind of thing because it's sort of a guarantee that your book will never be adapted because one already exists out there, and so it's one of the few books that I never get asked about because people think it's been made into a movie already.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We want to thank all of you for being
Thank
here.
you.
And there is an opportunity